She smirked as she parked her Lexus sideways, blocking my snowplow like she owned the road. Said it was private HOA space. Said I had no authority. But as the blizzard rolled in and the snow kept falling, her little power trip froze into something else. By dawn, her car was sealed in a wall of ice, not by me, but by the very storm she tried to control. She screamed, she called the cops, she begged for help. But this time, no one came running. Because the neighborhood had seen it all, and they chose the guy with the plow over the woman with the clipboard. This is the true story of how one winter storm buried more than just her car. It buried her authority. The first heavy snowfall of the season always carries a hush with it, as though the world itself pauses to listen. Out here in Willow Creek Ridge, where the roads twist gently around pine-covered hills and weathered ranch fences, winter doesn't knock. It simply arrives unannounced and absolute. And when it does, I make certain the streets stay open. I'm no hired contractor, no official city crew. The HOA doesn't pay me a dime. I do it because someone has to. My Ram 3500 sits in the garage like an old warhorse heavy-duty frame and front-mounted plow ready for battle. After 20 years in the military, my internal clock still refuses to let me sleep past dawn when a storm is rolling in. So every winter, without exception, I'm up before the sky turns gray, engine warming, radio murmuring low. A thermos of black coffee steaming in my hand, blade lowered and ready to carve paths through whatever the night has dumped on us. This year the forecast was brutal, an early wet, punishing front that would bury us deep. The kind of storm that locks cars in place, snaps branches under ice weight, and turns our winding subdivision roads into treacherous slides if left untouched. When the alerts pinged across every phone in the neighborhood, I ran my checklist fuel tanks, topped blade edges, sharpened salt bags loaded. I was prepared. But this year felt different from the start. This year, Karen Delaney had just been elected HOA vice president. I'd never had a real problem with Karen before. We'd exchanged polite nods at the mailbox cluster over the years. She favored bold red crimson jackets, scarlet lipstick nails painted like fresh blood. But beneath the bright palette, her demeanor was pure frost. Whispers traveled fast in a place like ours. Anonymous noise, complaints about children laughing too loudly in their own yards. Venomous letters taped to garage doors over fence slats that dared to deviate from approved styles. Classic small-time tyrant behavior, the sort that makes people roll their eyes at the very mention of an HOA. None of it had ever touched me directly. Until now. 3 days before the first flakes fell, an email landed in my inbox. Subject: Unauthorized snowplow activity. Dear Mr. Rourke, it has come to our attention that you have been independently operating a snowplow vehicle within the boundaries of Willow Creek Ridge without prior approval from the Homeowners Association. Please be advised that all street maintenance activities must be coordinated through official HOA channels. While we appreciate your intentions, we must insist that all snow clearing operations cease immediately until the board has conducted a formal review. Sincerely, Karen Delaney, Vice President, Willow Creek Ridge HOA. I read it once, then again slower. A third time just to be sure the words hadn't rearranged themselves. Cease snow clearing operations. I wasn't touching HOA-owned common areas. I was clearing the county roads that loop through our neighborhood public rights-of-way. The city plows often don't reach until late afternoon, if at all. More importantly, I had a letter on file from the county road department itself, dated, signed, and framed in my office drawer, thanking me for years of volunteer service and explicitly encouraging me to continue, provided I followed basic safety guidelines. I pulled the letter out, unfolded it, and stared at the official seal one more time just to reassure myself it was real. Then I archived Karen's email and went on with my day. The next morning, she escalated. A bright orange violation notice was taped to my mailbox, printed on official HOA letterhead, like a counterfeit parking ticket. It cited me for unauthorized operation of commercial-grade equipment on residential roadways. I actually laughed out loud, the sound echoing strangely in the cold morning air. I glanced around, half expecting to spot someone watching from behind curtains. This wasn't a friendly reminder. This was a declaration. In the quiet suburban chess game, we suddenly found ourselves playing Karen Delaney had just advanced her pawn. I still didn't reply. Escalation felt pointless. Surely she'd realize her mistake once someone explained the difference between county easements and HOA sidewalks. Or maybe the rush of new authority had simply gone to her head. Either way, I refused to be baited into a pointless feud. But the weather, indifferent to human politics, kept its own schedule. Friday evening, the temperature plummeted to 26 degrees, and thick clouds rolled in like battleship gray wool. The first flakes began around 300 a.m., fat, wet, relentless. I was out before sunrise, boots laced tight engine, growling low plow blade, scraping down to pavement with that familiar, satisfying grind. By the time I reached the East Loop near Elmwood Circle, I spotted it immediately, the unmistakable glint of a red Lexus SUV parked sideways across the cul-de-sac. Karen's vehicle, positioned deliberately, half on the curb, half blocking the turning radius exactly where my plow needed to swing wide. I eased to a stop, wipers beating back the thickening veil of white, and stared for a long minute. No lights glowed in her house. No silhouette moved behind the tinted windows of the SUV. Just that defiant crimson shape planted in the middle of the road like a challenge. Coincidence unlikely. I sat there, engine idling, watching the flakes pile softly on my hood. Then I shifted into reverse, backed away, and skipped the loop entirely. I wasn't about to scrape paint off her fender or hand her ammunition for a property damage claim. But I did pull out my phone and took several clear time-stamped photos, evidence, not anger. By noon, we were buried under 6 fresh inches, and another HOA email had already gone out to the entire neighborhood. Subject: Snowplow Incident, Elmwood Circle. Dear residents, please be advised that unauthorized snowplowing activity was observed again this morning. Additionally, a resident vehicle on Elmwood Circle created a temporary safety concern. We urge everyone to park responsibly and to await official HOA-approved contractors before any snow removal takes place. Thank you for your cooperation. Karen Delaney, Vice President, Willow Creek Ridge HOA. A safety concern. The irony tasted metallic. Her message was crystal clear: keep plowing, and she'd find new ways to paint me as the villain. As the storm intensified and the wind began to howl through the pines, I felt the first cold stir of something deeper than annoyance. This wasn't about a driveway anymore. This was about control. And Karen Delaney had no idea whose path she'd just stepped into. I told myself it would blow over. People like Karen thrive on reaction. Deny them an audience, and they usually move on to fresher targets. So I stayed quiet, kept my routine, and waited for common sense to prevail. The weather, however, had other plans. 4 days after the first incident, the mercury refused to climb above freezing. A second, heavier system barreled in from the northwest, promising a foot of snow overnight. This wasn't the light, powdery stuff that kids love. It was wet, dense, the kind that packs into concrete when the temperature hovers near zero. The sort that turns steep driveways into luge runs and buries anything left outside. I prepped the truck early, diesel tanks full, a fresh headlamp bulb, swapped in extra bags of salt stacked behind the cab for traction. My custom V-blade, welded myself after a brutal winter in Michigan years ago, gleamed under the garage light, hungry for work. Sleep was shallow that night. At 4:07 a.m., I was rolling out headlights, cutting twin tunnels through the swirling white. The neighborhood lay silent and pristine, every roof capped in thick frosting, every street a blank canvas. I worked methodically, scraping down to asphalt, pushing the heavy drifts to the curbs in clean, even windrows. Then I reached Elmwood Circle again. She was waiting. The red Lexus SUV hadn't moved since the last storm. A frozen halo of ice ringed its tires, but now Karen had escalated her barricade. Bright orange traffic cones formed a crude triangle around the vehicle, and a hand-lettered sign zip-tied to one of them flapped in the wind. No entry, private HOA area. I braked gently, the plow blade dipping slightly, and stared at the ridiculous little fortress she'd constructed in the dark. The cones glowed faintly in my headlights like warning beacons around a shipwreck. The sign was pure fantasy. Elmwood Circle is a public county road, not HOA property. But the message was unmistakable. She doubled down. I sat there long enough for the cab to fill with the smell of hot coffee and diesel exhaust. My breath fogged the windshield in slow rhythms. Finally, I reached for my phone, snapped several clear photos, cone sign, timestamp, glowing in the corner, and reversed carefully back down the hill. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, my hands weren't shaking from cold. It was something closer to controlled fury, the kind I'd learned to leash long ago in hotter places than this. This wasn't petty bureaucracy anymore. This was deliberate obstruction, dangerous obstruction. Our streets slope sharply toward Elmwood. When they ice over, vehicles slide. Last winter, an Amazon van had fishtailed into a flower bed on that very hill. If someone got hurt because the only capable plow couldn't reach the worst corner, the blame wouldn't fall on the weather. It would fall on whoever made clearing impossible. And that someone wore a crimson jacket and carried a clipboard like a scepter. Around 6:30 a.m., I spotted her. She emerged from her garage in full winter armor, bright red parka zipped to the chin. Tall black boots, clipboard clutched like a shield. She strutted down her freshly shoveled walk, paused beside the Lexus, and surveyed her cone triangle with visible satisfaction. Then she raised her phone and began taking pictures of her own handiwork as though documenting official policy. I watched from half a block away, engine idling, wipers sweeping lazy arcs. She was building a paper trail to justify closing a public road. Later that morning, Melinda Green, 2 doors down from Karen, left me a quiet voicemail. "Hey Mark, just a warning. Karen sent a block-wide email claiming you're running an illegal commercial vehicle through residential streets. She says she's filing formal complaints with the board and maybe even the county. Thought you should know." I thanked her, hung up, and opened the scanned copy of my county agreement. The highlighted sentence jumped out at me like a lifeline. Volunteer snow clearing efforts by residents shall not be restricted or penalized by local HOAs when performed on county-maintained roads within residential zones. Black and white, signed and dated. But Karen wasn't interested in legalities. She was interested in winning. That evening, as fresh flurries thickened into heavy veils and the wind rattled bare branches like bones, I made a call. Tom Willis came the gravelly answer. "Tom, it's Mark Rourke up in Willow Creek Ridge. Hey, soldier, you folks getting hammered again? More than the weather." I laid it out calmly. The emails, the violation notice, the deliberate blockades, the cones, the threatening letters. I wasn't asking for rescue, just confirmation. I still stood on solid ground. Tom exhaled, like a man who'd heard this song before. "You're on county right-of-way, Mark. As long as you're not tearing up curbs or private property, the HOA has zero jurisdiction. Want me to refresh that in writing? I'd appreciate it. Emailing tonight. And hey, document every damn thing. Photos, videos, timestamps. If this goes sideways, you'll want an airtight record. Already on it. Good man." I hung up and spread the growing folder across my kitchen table. Every photo of blocked roads, every email, every time-stamped frame of Karen's crimson SUV, planted like a flag in the cul-de-sac. The evidence stack grew thicker with each passing hour. Rage would have been easy. Instead, something colder and more useful settled in my chest. Resolve. I wasn't going to shout, threaten, or stoop to her level. I was going to wait, because people who overreach eventually step too far. And when Karen did, I'd be ready with proof in one hand and patience in the other. Outside, the storm raged on, piling drift upon drift, erasing footprints, muffling the world. Inside, I sharpened my focus the way I once sharpened blades in far less forgiving winters. The next move was hers. But the ground beneath her was already starting to shift. The third storm arrived sooner and meaner than any forecast had dared predict. One moment, the sky hung low and sullen. The next, it split open, unleashing thick wind-driven waves of white that swallowed streetlights whole. Meteorologists threw around phrases like historic accumulation and near-zero visibility. For most folks in Willow Creek Ridge, that meant remote work, canceled plans, and the steady hum of furnaces fighting the cold. For me, it meant the fight had entered a new phase. I'd kept my silence after the cone incident, hoping a little distance might cool tempers. But the consequences of Karen's interference were starting to bite. Neighbors I'd known for years began reaching out quietly, texts, quick waves from doorways, hushed phone calls. They thanked me for past winters, then asked, voice low, why the streets were turning into skating rinks. An elderly couple at the bottom of Hickory Lane called first. Their old sedan had slewed sideways into a drift. The home health nurse couldn't reach them. I pulled on my boots, grabbed a shovel and a bag of salt, and spent an hour digging them out by hand. When I finished, the husband pressed a warm thermos of soup into my gloved hands and whispered, "We're praying this nonsense ends soon." Later that afternoon, Mike down on Cedar Loop shot me a text. "Karen's threatening fines if anyone shovels the shared alley. What the hell is going on, man?" That same evening, a thread appeared on the neighborhood forum. "Anyone else notice the kids almost wiped out waiting for the bus this morning? Ice everywhere. Mark used to have these streets spotless by dawn." 20 replies piled up in hours, then 30. A groundswell of quiet frustration. Karen, of course, responded in her trademark clipped tone. "Residents are reminded that all snow removal must adhere to HOA guidelines. Unauthorized activity creates unnecessary liability. Please direct concerns to the board." I nearly snorted. Liability. As if the real risk wasn't black ice on untreated hills. The danger was no longer theoretical. A package truck slid sideways on Maple Drive the next day, tires spinning uselessly, until the driver gave up and called for a tow. I walked over with sand and a shovel helped him rock free. He wiped sweat from his brow despite the cold and muttered, "Your HOA lady's gonna get somebody killed." He wasn't wrong. So I took Tom Willis's advice to heart and turned documentation into a discipline. I mounted a GoPro on the dash, synced it to my phone, and recorded every pass-blocked, cul-de-sac skidding tires, children slipping on sidewalks. My own truck reversing carefully away from deliberate obstacles. I saved every frame of Karen's red Lexus SUV, squatting defiantly in the turning circle. No drama, no confrontation, just cold, irrefutable record. I also started knocking on doors. Not to rally a mob, just to share facts. To the Kellers, I didn't clear the circle today because Karen's vehicle is parked across it again. I've got video if you'd like to see. To the Coopers County gave me written permission years ago. Happy to forward the letter. To Mrs. Martinez, no, the HOA can't actually stop you from clearing your own driveway. That's private property. Word traveled faster than any blizzard. Karen wasn't just picking a fight with me anymore. She was alienating everyone who simply wanted safe passage to work, school, or the grocery store. I didn't have to stoke the fire. She was pouring gasoline on it herself. 3 nights later, a plain white envelope slid under my front door. No stamp, no email trail. Just neat handwriting on the front, Mr. Mark Rourke. Inside was a typed letter from Marlene Kelly, the retired schoolteacher on the north corner. To whom it may concern, this letter serves as a formal statement regarding recent snow-related hazards on Willow Creek Ridge streets. I, Marlene Kelly, have personally observed Mr. Mark Rourke's diligent snowplow efforts over the past 3 winters. His work has been consistent, cautious, and vital to community safety. The recent obstruction of his duties by Ms. Karen Delaney has directly contributed to dangerous conditions on multiple streets, including Oak Crescent and Elmwood Circle. Last week, my grandson slipped on untreated ice and narrowly avoided serious injury. I fear worse incidents if this continues. I fully support Mr. Rourke's volunteer efforts and urgently request that the HOA reverse its interference. Sincerely, Marlene Kelly. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and added it to the growing folder. It wasn't the praise that moved me. It was the realization that people were watching, really watching and choosing to speak up. The isolation I'd felt in the beginning was thawing faster than any spring sun could manage. Karen, in her zeal to tighten control, had forgotten a basic truth. When you push reasonable people far enough, they push back politely, firmly, and in writing. So I took one more measured step. I compiled every video clip, every photo, every county document, every resident letter into a single, neatly organized digital packet. Then I emailed it to the County Road Safety Office with a short professional cover note. And finally, without ceremony, I printed a hard copy, slid it into a plain manila folder, and walked it to the doorstep of HOA President Robert Langston himself. I didn't knock, didn't leave a note. I simply set it down, turned, and walked away through the lightly falling flakes. As another veil of white settled over the rooftops that night, I felt the ground shift not dramatically, but unmistakably. Karen believed she held all the cards. But winter has a way of laying bare what's hidden beneath the surface. Hers was coming. There's a unique silence that descends with relentless snowfall, one that doesn't just mute the world, but wraps it in a thick, insulating shroud. Sounds fade into echoes, footsteps vanish under fresh layers, and even the sharpest worries feel momentarily softened. But on that third morning in as many weeks as I guided the ram toward Elmwood Circle once more, the quiet carried an electric undercurrent, like the tense hush before a thunderstorm breaks. The latest system had dumped another 8 inches overnight, transforming Willow Creek Ridge into a sculpted wonderland rooftops, crowned with heavy meringue peaks. Sidewalks erased into seamless white plains, driveways carved into narrow trenches by desperate shovels. I'd been at it since 4 a.m., methodically clearing the eastern quadrants, pausing to check on the elderly couple again, ensuring no one remained trapped behind impenetrable barriers. Progress felt solid, almost routine. Until Elmwood. There it was again, Karen's red Lexus SUV rooted in the identical spot, a crimson thorn in the heart of the cul-de-sac. But this time she wasn't content with mere parking. She occupied the driver's seat, visible through the frosted windshield, her bright red parka, a vivid slash against the monochrome landscape. I eased to a halt, 30 feet back, engine thrumming softly, wipers battling the relentless cascade. Our eyes met. Across the divide, she tracked me steadily, unflinching. Then, to my astonishment, she broke into a wide, triumphant grin. It wasn't warm or conciliatory. It was the gleeful sneer of a strategist who believed the board was hers, the smug tilt of the head that dared me to advance. She even cocked her chin slightly, as if whispering through the glass. "Your move. I've got you." I held her gaze unmoving. She was angling for a reaction, praying I'd snap shout, perhaps nudge too close with the blade. Anything to spin into a report of aggression or recklessness. Fuel for her narrative. So I simply stared back, letting the flakes dance between us like neutral arbiters. After a beat, she lifted her phone, undoubtedly recording, perhaps even streaming to her HOA inner circle. Then she honked once, a short mocking toot that cut through the muffled air like a taunt. I allowed myself a faint, measured smile. Then I shifted into reverse and backed away, maintaining eye contact until the curve hid her from view. I skipped the circle again. But this time I didn't head straight home. Instead, I looped the long way around, parked discreetly 2 blocks over behind a stand of evergreens, and slipped out on foot. Cutting through a neighbor's snow-dusted backyard, I positioned myself for a panoramic shot. The Lexus planted defiantly untouched, roads sprawling behind it, faint sled tracks from nearby kids, veering perilously close to glassy patches. She never noticed the click of my camera. The photo would prove invaluable soon enough. That afternoon, with the storm's fury easing into sporadic gusts, I orchestrated a modest assembly in my garage. Nothing grand, just 5 neighboring households, invited for what I dubbed a winter safety chat. I brewed spiced cider on a portable stove, arranged folding chairs around a propane heater that cast a warm, flickering glow, and kept the bay door cracked for fresh air. We didn't utter Karen's name once. Instead, we discussed the real threats, the treacherous incline on Briarcrest, where tires lost grip daily, the teenager who'd nearly collided with a mailbox the previous evening, the parents struggling to maneuver strollers through slush-choked paths. We reminisced about winters past, when dawn revealed pristine lanes and a sense of security that came from knowing one quiet resident handled the heavy lifting without fanfare or expectation. The dialogue flowed naturally, weaving concern into camaraderie. Laughter even surfaced, nervous at first, then genuine, as stories of close calls gave way to shared resolve. As if fate had a sense of humor, Karen herself cruised past, around 4:15 p.m. I caught sight of her through the open garage door, slowing deliberately, eyes narrowing at the circle of chairs, the rising steam from mugs, the easy posture of people united by common sense. Her expression-hardened lips compressing into a thin line of disapproval. Then she accelerated away, tires crunching indignantly over the packed ice. By morning, her retaliation arrived via mass email. Subject: Unauthorized gathering and use of propane heaters in driveways. Dear residents, it has come to our attention that an unsanctioned assembly took place yesterday involving the use of open flame appliances in a publicly visible area. We remind all that gatherings of 5 or more households require prior board approval, and all equipment must comply with HOA safety protocols. Future violations may lead to official citations. Thank you for your cooperation. Karen Delaney, Vice President, Willow Creek Ridge HOA. I read it without responding, but Melinda Green did. Her reply was measured yet unyielding. Karen, I attended. We shared cider and talked about keeping our children safe amid these storms. No music, no alcohol, no fire risks. If safety is the HOA's priority, perhaps we should prioritize road clearance over scrutinizing friendly discussions. 3 others chimed in, swiftly echoing her sentiment. In that moment, a subtle pivot occurred. Karen's triumphant grin from behind the windshield, her barrage of citations, her bids to isolate and dominate, they weren't resonating as intended. The community wasn't oblivious or compliant. They were observant, intelligent, and increasingly vocal. That night, as the drifts climbed toward 2 feet and the wind sculpted eerie shapes across lawns, Karen's Lexus remained entrenched, a solitary emblem of obstinacy. She assumed invulnerability, unaware that the very elements she sought to manipulate possessed their own impartial logic. Nature doesn't align with egos. It simply accumulates and overwhelms. The weight of being right while the world lags behind can feel heavier than any drift of packed ice. I had played every card correctly. No outbursts, no retaliation, just layer upon layer of quiet evidence. Still, Karen kept her red Lexus SUV planted like a velvet barrier across the cul-de-sac, convinced her position was impregnable. But I had decided the waiting game was nearly over. That morning, after the most savage storm yet had entombed us beneath 22 fresh inches, I stood in the garage admiring the plow blade. It rested there like a patient predator, broad-scarred from years of service icicles, dangling from its edge like crystalline fangs catching the pale dawn light. Beside it lay the thick folder that had become my silent ally, every photograph, every email thread, every county ordinance, every letter of support topped now by Tom Willis's freshly signed affidavit restating that HOA rules held no sway over county roads. I didn't just have a defense. I had an unbreakable shield. So I made a few strategic calls. First to Tom. "I'm not looking for cavalry," I told him. "Just giving fair warning. I'll be clearing Elmwood Circle tomorrow at 5:30 a.m., same as always. Even if she parks there again, especially then." He paused. "She'll scream harassment. I won't lay a finger or a blade on her vehicle." A low chuckle rumbled through the line. "Smart. Just keep that camera rolling." Already planned. Next call went to Officer Rachel Dean, at the sheriff's office, the community liaison, who'd once helped reroute traffic when a downed oak blocked the park entrance. "Just a courtesy heads up," I said, expecting some potential drama tomorrow morning. Possible complaint of obstruction or trespass from our HOA vice president. Karen Delaney, she sighed the name like an old acquaintance. "You're not the first to mention her. Enthusiasm for rules." I smiled despite the cold. "I'll be strictly within county guidelines. GoPro running full documentation." "Good, stay calm. If she dials us, we'll know exactly what we're walking into." I hung up feeling something I hadn't in weeks, steady certainty. Not arrogant, simple clarity that comes when preparation meets principle. The forecast promised a brief respite, no new precipitation, just a hard freeze locking everything in place overnight. Perfect conditions for clean, sharp edges and minimal scatter. Less mess, better sightlines. That night, I reviewed every GoPro clip from the past fortnight, bookmarking critical moments, her SUV blocking the circle, the orange cones, kids slipping on hidden ice, my truck reversing without contact, neighbors nodding gratefully as I explained the situation. I backed everything up to a USB drive, then to the cloud. Then I slept the deep, untroubled sleep of a man who knows the next day will belong to facts, not theatrics. At 5:15 a.m., the engine caught with its familiar throaty growl. 12 degrees outside, sky still ink black. I layered up insulated coveralls, double gloves, thin balaclava beneath my watch cap. The overnight crust sparkled under my headlights like broken glass over velvet. Rolling toward Elmwood Circle, I switched on the GoPro. And there she was, right on schedule. The red Lexus SUV occupied the exact center of the turning radius cones, still in their absurd triangle, one now leaning drunkenly in the wind. The driver's seat was empty this time, but the message remained loud and clear. I stopped 30 feet back, killed the engine, and stepped out into the biting stillness. I set up a small tripod on the sidewalk, aimed my phone for a wide establishing shot, then checked the dash cam one last time, 5:33 a.m. Without a word or gesture, I climbed back in, engaged the plow, and began clearing around her vehicle. Carefully, legally, relentlessly. The blade never approached closer than 5 feet. I carved wide, graceful arcs that followed the natural curve of the circle, except where the Lexus sat. With each deliberate pass, the walls of displaced white rose higher, sculpted into neat, symmetrical banks. I wasn't encircling her out of spite. I was simply doing the job the neighborhood needed. Yet with every sweep, her SUV began to resemble a lone, crimson island in an ocean of ice, isolated, elevated slightly on its untouched patch, surrounded by towering ridges that reflected the first hints of dawn. By 6:12 a.m., the circle was pristine everywhere, except the precise footprint of her vehicle. I stepped out once more, took several panoramic photos from the sidewalk, and drove away without a backward glance. At 8:00 a.m., my phone lit up. Unknown number, voicemail. I played it on speaker. Mr. Rourke, this is Karen Delaney. I am utterly appalled. You have deliberately entombed my vehicle beneath walls of snow. I regard this as targeted harassment and malicious denial of access. The HOA will be contacting county authorities and, if necessary, pursuing a restraining order. You have gone too far. I saved the message, timestamped it, and added it to the folder. Then I opened my email. 3 new messages waited. One from Karen CC to the entire board, repeating her voicemail accusations in formal language. One from Robert Langston, the HOA president, subject line, blank body, empty, except a single read receipt. And one from Officer Rachel Dean. I opened hers first. Subject, follow-up, snow removal incident. Mark, we received a call from Ms. Delaney this morning alleging intentional burial of her vehicle. I reviewed the footage you uploaded overnight. Thank you for the prompt share. Your operation was fully compliant, no contact with the vehicle, no obstruction of legal ingress/egress, and safe distance maintained throughout. No further action will be taken on our end. Continue documenting as needed. Regards, Officer R. Dean, Community Liaison. I exhaled slowly, watching my breath cloud and vanish. The field was clear. Karen had played her hand, every ounce of borrowed authority, every veiled threat, and now she sat behind the wheel of a Lexus, framed by 4-foot snowbanks she had forced into existence. No one was coming to rescue her, because it wasn't illegal. It was simply inevitable, and in its own frozen way, beautiful. The blizzard refused to relent. 4 straight days of unrelenting assault turned what had been a severe winter into something locals would remember for decades. Schools shut down indefinitely, delivery trucks sat abandoned along highways, power lines sagged and snapped under sleeves of ice. The sky remained a churning cauldron of white, as though the entire neighborhood had been shaken inside a giant snow globe, and no one had yet set it down. I was still out in it, every dawn, pushing the limits of both truck and body. Karen, meanwhile, had gone strangely silent after her furious voicemail and the sheriff's polite dismissal. No fresh emails, no new violation notices fluttering on mailboxes. Just an eerie quiet from her end of the street, as if she'd finally recognized the corner she'd painted herself into. I should have known better than to trust the calm. On the 3rd morning of that endless storm, I spotted her through the swirling gusts. She stood beside the Lexus in her bright red parka boots, sunk to the shins, wielding a small ice scraper like a sword against the banks I'd left days earlier. She chipped and scraped with frantic energy, breath pluming in angry clouds, but the walls were forged from wet, compacted layers, now hardened by repeated freezes. She made barely a dent. The sight was almost pitiful until I remembered every skidding car, every frightened child, every elderly neighbor stranded because of her choices. That same afternoon, Mike swung by with a steaming mug of coffee and a grin he couldn't quite hide. "You seen the forum lately?" I shook my head. He held up his phone and read aloud a post from Karen herself. "I find it deeply troubling that certain residents believe weaponizing snow removal for personal vendettas is acceptable. This is a community, not a war zone." He scrolled lower. 23 replies so far, every single one backing you. People posting pics of their cleared driveways with captions like, "Thank you, Mark," and "Real heroes don't wear capes, they drive plows." I allowed myself a quiet chuckle, but I didn't let it swell into overconfidence. Winter storms breed gratitude fast, but memories can thaw just as quickly. Still, I stayed vigilant, fuel checked, chains ready, emergency kit stocked. Then came the email that confirmed she wasn't finished fighting. Subject: Emergency HOA meeting, 6 a.m. tomorrow. Dear residents, Given ongoing severe weather and persistent concerns regarding unauthorized snow removal, an emergency virtual meeting will be held tomorrow at 6 a.m. via Zoom. All residents are strongly encouraged to attend. Sincerely, Karen Delaney, Vice President, Willow Creek Ridge, HOA, 6 a.m. Precisely when I'd be out clearing the worst of the overnight dump. It wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. She wanted me occupied, unable to join, so she could frame the narrative unchallenged, while the storm provided cover for one last power play. She'd misjudged me badly. I rigged a Bluetooth headset, mounted my phone on a dash cradle with the Zoom app ready, and charged every battery twice. I'd plow and participate. Both. The final surge hit just after 3 a.m. Winds howling like freight trains, visibility collapsing to a few yards. By 4:45, I was carving the main loop, blade biting deep headlights, carving glowing tunnels through the chaos. At 600 sharp, the Zoom chime sounded in my ear. I tapped join, muted myself, and listened while the truck growled forward. Karen's voice filled the cab, polished and authoritative. Good morning, and thank you for braving the early hour. As you're all aware, we've faced significant challenges with unauthorized heavy equipment operating in our streets, creating both division and potential danger. I kept plowing steady passes down Cedar Loop. This isn't personal, she continued. It's about order protocols and shared liability. We cannot permit individual residents to override established rules. That path leads only to chaos. The scrape of steel on asphalt punctuated her words like deliberate counterpoint. I unmuted briefly. The individual in question, I said evenly, is currently opening the neighborhood entrance, so today's delivery drivers don't end up stuck again. Then I muted once more. The chat window erupted in a flurry I could glimpse on my mounted screen. He's out there right now keeping us safe. Thank you, Mark. Maybe focus on actual roads instead of Zoom calls. Karen tried to regain control, but a faint crack threaded her composure. It was then guiding the truck toward Elmwood Circle one final time that nature delivered its verdict. The red Lexus remained exactly where she'd left it, frozen defiant. But overnight winds had scoured one side nearly clean while piling monstrous drifts against the other. Enough open space existed for me to execute a full sweeping 70-degree pass around the vehicle without ever touching it. I didn't add a single flake to her predicament. The storm did. With each careful arc, the wind-sculpted drifts closed the remaining gaps, completing the encirclement I'd begun days earlier. By the time my final loop was done, the Lexus stood fully sealed. A perfect, unmarred cocoon of wind-packed white roof, barely visible doors entombed behind seamless walls. Not a mark from my blade. Not a scratch on her paint. Just the impartial, relentless logic of winter doing what winter does best. Back in the Zoom call, Karen was mid-motion. I moved that we immediately suspend Mr. Rourke's snowplowing activities and request formal county review. A male voice cut in before anyone could second Robert Langston, the president himself. Karen, he's operating on county roads with county blessing. And frankly, you immobilized your own vehicle by blocking him repeatedly. Perhaps it's time to park elsewhere. Another resident added motion fails for lack of common sense. The chat flooded again, a wave of agreement. By 6:45, the meeting ended abruptly. No votes taken, no resolutions passed, no apologies offered. None were needed. Outside in the hush that follows a storm's exhaustion, my quiet persistence had spoken louder than any argument Karen could muster. The circle was clear everywhere except the small crimson heart at its center. And for the first time in weeks, the road ahead felt truly open. Dawn broke pale and unforgiving after the storm finally spent itself. A weak, watery light filtered through the thinning clouds, turning the endless white into a glittering, merciless expanse. The neighborhood lay stunned under its frozen burden trees, bowed low, power lines etched in ice, every surface crusted hard as armor. I rolled through the streets one last time before full daylight, checking for downed branches or new hazards, spreading the last of my salt on the worst corners. When I reached Elmwood Circle, I cut the engine and simply looked. Karen's red Lexus SUV was no longer merely surrounded. It was entombed. Nature had finished what the wind started, and my careful plowing had framed. Overnight gusts had sculpted the drifts into seamless, wind-polished walls that curled over the roof like a frozen wave, frozen mid-crash. The hood peeked out only slightly. The rear bumper jutted like a forgotten relic. Door handles had vanished entirely beneath sculpted ridges. The entire vehicle looked less like a modern SUV and more like an archaeological find, something accidentally preserved by an ancient glacier. I stepped out, boots crunching through the brittle crust breath hanging in the air like smoke signals. The cold stung my face, sharp and clean. I circled slowly, taking it in from every angle. No shovel in hand, no urge to gloat, just quiet witness to a moment that felt less like victory and more like gravity finally asserting itself. This wasn't my doing, not directly. It was hers, compounded by winter's impartial arithmetic. I pulled out my phone and recorded a slow, steady panorama. Not for mockery, for closure. At 7:12 a.m., Melinda called. "Mark," she whispered as if volume might shatter the scene, "you need to see this. She's out there, with a hairdryer." I blinked. A hairdryer? Extension cord all the way from her garage. She's aiming it at the snowbank like it's a dragon she can slay. And she's yelling. A lot. I pinched the bridge of my nose, half laughing, half sighing. Thanks for the update. I didn't drive over. No need. Instead, I climbed back into the warm cab, let the heater thaw my fingers, and watched from the hilltop overlook. Karen stood in the cul-de-sac in her scarlet overcoat, now unzipped and flapping like a battle flag. The orange extension cord snaked across her sidewalk and into the drift, a bright lifeline stretched to its limit. She leaned forward, hairdryer roaring on high, directing the feeble stream of warm air at the impenetrable wall. Every few seconds, she kicked the bank in frustration, shouted something lost to the wind, then attacked again with the dryer. It was equal parts tragic and absurd. Neighbors began to appear. Some walked dogs, others hauled trash bins to the curb. Everyone gave her a wide, silent berth. No one stopped to ask if she needed help. No one even slowed long enough to pretend concern. They simply observed, shook their heads, and moved on. Mike passed with his daughter on a sled. He glanced up at my truck, caught my eye, and lifted a gloved thumb in quiet salute. That was all. By early afternoon, an anonymous photo hit the neighborhood forum. A slightly blurry shot of Karen hunched forward, hairdryer extended like a futile weapon, the entombed Lexus. A ghostly red shape in the background. Caption: "Our HOA VP hard at work this morning." The comments rolled in like an avalanche of their own. Karma's got impeccable timing. So that's what the dues pay for professional hairdryer deployment. Anyone else suddenly grateful for Mark's early mornings? Can we nominate him for something that isn't a violation notice? No one rose to her defense. Even Robert Langston, usually reserved and diplomatic, posted a short note. "Let's keep our focus on what actually keeps us safe this winter. Thank you again, Mark." It was the first time the president had publicly acknowledged the conflict, and it felt like the final crack in a dam that had been straining for weeks. That evening, the sky cleared completely for the first time in days. Stars pierced the black like scattered diamonds, sharp and cold. The temperature plunged deeper, turning every breath into a fleeting cloud. The snow glowed faintly under moonlight, beautiful in its severity. I took one last slow drive through the streets. They remained passable, my work holding firm. Passing Elmwood Circle, I saw the extension cord still lying across the sidewalk, half buried, now abandoned. The hairdryer was gone. The Cocoon remained untouched. Karen's porch light stayed dark. I drove on without slowing. There was nothing left to prove. The roads were open. The neighborhood was breathing easier. And the woman, who had tried to bury everyone under rules and resentment, now sat isolated in the very element she'd attempted to control. Not by my hand. By her own stubborn choices. And by winter's quiet, inexorable judgment. The morning after the skies finally cleared, Willow Creek Ridge woke slowly, as if emerging from a long, fevered dream. Sunlight struck the endless white at a low angle, turning every surface into a blinding mirror. People ventured out, cautiously bundled figures squinting against the glare, testing the crust with tentative steps, marveling at streets that remained remarkably passable despite the historic dump. It should have felt like renewal. It almost did. Until the scream sliced through the crystalline air. It began as a frustrated grunt, then escalated into a raw, piercing wail that echoed off frozen rooftops. Even from my garage 2 blocks away, I knew instantly whose voice it was. Karen. I was checking tire pressures on the truck when the second longer shriek followed pure, unfiltered exasperation. Then came the rhythmic thud and scrape of metal slamming into ice, a shovel hurled against the Cocoon in helpless fury. Melinda, out walking her terrier, froze on the sidewalk and glanced toward Elmwood Circle, then at me. Should we go see? She asked, equal parts worry and weariness. I shook my head. Let's give it a minute. 20 minutes later, I drove down for a routine salt run. The intersection near the circle had refrozen slick overnight, and the county trucks wouldn't arrive until afternoon. I had a few bags left and planned to spread them anyway. But I paused at the crest of the hill. The scene deserved witness. Karen stood knee-deep in the bank she'd helped create, wielding a battered aluminum shovel that was already bent from the assault. Her scarlet overcoat hung open scarf, lost somewhere in the struggle, hair escaping its tie, in wild strands that whipped across her flushed face. She hacked at the driver's side wall with short, furious strokes, chips of ice flying like shrapnel, but the packed drift barely yielded. A shallow, ragged trench was all she'd managed, nowhere near the door handle. Across the street, Eli nursed a mug on his porch, watching in silence. A stranger walking his Labrador had his phone out, recording discreetly. Karen glanced up, spotted my truck, and went very still. For a heartbeat, I thought she might march over, demand answers, accuse me to my face. Instead, she flung the shovel down with a metallic clatter and stormed back into her house coat, flapping like a torn flag. 5 minutes later, she reemerged, phone pressed to her ear, a thick folder clutched in her other hand. She was calling the sheriff again. I stayed put, spreading salt along the curb in slow, deliberate arcs, exactly what I'd come to do. Officer Rachel Dean arrived within 15 minutes. She nodded to me as she stepped from the cruiser, then approached Karen on the porch. Their conversation was low, but Karen's gestures were expansive arms, sweeping toward the Cocoon, toward my truck, toward the sky itself, as if winter were my accomplice. Rachel listened without visible reaction. Eventually, she walked over. "Morning, Mark." "Morning, officer." Still salting the slick spots. "Yes, ma'am. Same as yesterday." She surveyed the open road, the salt granules sparkling in my wake, then the perfectly encapsulated Lexus. "She's alleging intentional burial, obstruction, endangerment, harassment, the full menu." I met her eyes calmly. Dashcam and GoPro footage from every pass is uploaded and timestamped. Natural drift and wind completed the enclosure overnight. No contact whatsoever. Rachel's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "I figured as much." She glanced back at Karen, arms now crossed, tight glare sharp enough to chip ice. "We'll log it as no action required. She can file civil if she wants, but it won't go far." "Thank you." Before climbing back into the cruiser, Rachel paused. "Oh, almost forgot. Robert Langston resigned from the board this morning. Posted it on the forum himself. Irreconcilable differences in leadership philosophy." I stopped mid-scoop. Robert had been Karen's last real ally. Without him, she stood alone. Rachel gave a small salute. "Keep doing what you're doing. You've got the whole neighborhood behind you now." She nodded toward the Cocoon. Except one. As the cruiser pulled away, Karen remained on her porch, stunned into silence. She had summoned help, and help had chosen the other side. That afternoon, gestures of gratitude began to appear. Neighbors waved from windows. A few walked over with foil-covered plates, thermoses of soup, a tin of homemade cookies from the Kellers with a simple note. For keeping the way clear and the air clearer. No one spoke Karen's name. No one needed to. Then near sunset came the loudest sound, yet repeated hollow clangs echoing across the circle. I stepped to the corner and watched. Karen, gloves gone, hands red and raw, was yanking desperately at her rear bumper, with both hands trying to rock the vehicle free, using the license plate as leverage. Face contorted, boots slipping, she pulled until her breath came in visible gasps. Not a single neighbor paused to offer a hand. The next morning, the video appeared. 30 seconds. Grainy but unmistakable. Shot from a distance across the circle, Karen, in her bright red parka hairdryer, aimed like a talisman at the towering bank, the entombed Lexus, a vague crimson lump behind her. No narration, no music, just the faint whine of the dryer and the wind. By noon, it had thousands of views on the neighborhood Facebook group. By evening, over 10,000 shared beyond our borders into local pages and beyond. Comments poured in, relentless but oddly weary rather than vicious. HOA energy strong enough to fight snow with a Con Air. Meanwhile, the rest of us just want to get to work. Thank you, Mark. Karma doesn't plow around obstacles. It piles on them. I didn't post it, didn't share it. Someone on Elmwood Circle had. But everyone knew who kept the streets open, while Karen battled her own fortress. The real shift wasn't happening in comment sections. It was happening in quiet inboxes, on front porches, around kitchen tables. It began with a petition. Melinda Green drafted it carefully, worded citing bylaws demanding an emergency HOA meeting to revisit snow removal policies and board authority limits. Within 24 hours, it carried 73 signatures, more than enough to force a vote. Local news picked up the scent next. A short piece on the community blog. Snowplow standoff rocks Willow Creek Ridge. A cropped photo of the Cocoon anonymous quotes praising the quiet volunteer who kept us moving when no one else did. My name stayed out of print, but everyone knew. Karen's response arrived at 3:07 p.m. Friday, another mass email. Subject: Clarification on snow removal authority. Dear residents, recent social media attention has unfortunately misrepresented ongoing maintenance procedures. The HOA remains committed to orderly protocols and continues to discourage unauthorized heavy equipment on community-adjacent roadways. We ask that discourse remain civil and fact-based rather than sensational. Sincerely, Karen Delaney, Vice President. It was the final misstep. Instead of the slightest concession, she offered only condescension, and the floodgates opened. Emails flooded the board inbox, parents, seniors, newcomers' voices that had stayed silent now furious and articulate. My dialysis appointments only happened because Mark cleared the hill. We waited for approved contractors who never came. Time for new leadership. Halfway through the thread, Robert Langston added his own. I resigned because I no longer believe this board is serving our community's best interests. These events only underscore that. I support a full policy review and fresh elections. It landed like a quiet thunderclap. By Sunday, the official announcement appeared on the clubhouse bulletin and in every inbox. Willow Creek Ridge Emergency HOA Meeting. Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. Community Center. Agenda: Review of snow removal policies, discussion of board authority and oversight. Potential restructuring of leadership roles. Open resident forum. That night, Karen's porch light stayed dark. Her Lexus remained sealed. But word spread that she'd finally hired a private crew, strangers in a battered pickup from 2 towns over, who arrived after midnight, worked 3 hours under floodlights, and carved a jagged, ugly tunnel just wide enough to winch the vehicle free. The Cocoon was breached, but the damage to paint, to pride, to reputation was permanent and irreparable. Wednesday evening arrived with a deceptive mildness, temperatures hovering just above freezing, the kind of soft thaw that turns hard-packed snow into slush and makes rooftops drip in steady rhythms. The community center parking lot filled early vehicles, nosing carefully into plowed spaces, headlights cutting through the dusk. Inside, the air hummed with something rarer than anger, unified anticipation. Folding chairs scraped across the floor as residents claimed seats. Extra rows had been added along the walls. Even then, people stood shoulder to shoulder at the back. Some carried travel mugs of coffee, others paper plates of cookies passed around like peace offerings. Children sat cross-legged on the carpeted area up front, sensing the unusual energy but behaving anyway. It felt less like a disciplinary hearing and more like a town gathering long overdue. Karen entered through the side door at 6:25, blazer pressed, hair pulled back severely, a thick stack of papers clutched to her chest like armor. She scanned the room, once lips tightening when she realized every seat faced the front table, where she would sit. No one stood to greet her. No one shifted to make space. She took her place beside the 2 remaining board members, both of whom avoided her eyes. At 6:30 sharp, Robert Langston, no longer president, but still commanding respect, stepped to the microphone without ceremony. Thank you all for coming out tonight, he began, voice steady and warm. We're here because of snow, sure. But really we're here because of trust, and how quickly it can erode when power is misused. A low murmur rippled through the room, not hostile, just acknowledging. Robert continued. What unfolded these past weeks wasn't just about blocked roads or parked cars. It was about whether this association exists to serve us or to control us. About whether one person's need to be right can outweigh an entire community's need to be safe. He paused, letting the words settle. And maybe the clearest lesson this winter gave us is simple: when one neighbor consistently shows up with a plow, a shovel, or just common decency, without expecting praise or payment, that's the kind of leadership we should protect, not punish. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. The applause started in the back row, sporadic at first, then swelling until it filled the room, steady, sincere, and unmistakably directed away from the front table. Karen sat motionless, staring at her papers as if they might sprout defenses. Her fingers whitened around the edges. The agenda moved quickly. Melinda Green presented the petition, calm, factual, citing bylaws and precedents. Residents spoke in turn, the dialysis patient, whose appointments had stayed on schedule only because a certain truck cleared the hill. The young mother who could finally push her stroller to the park. The Amazon driver who'd sent a thank you card, care of the forum. Each story brief, respectful, devastating in its accumulation. When the floor opened for general comment, no one defended the old policies. No one defended Karen. A motion to overhaul snow removal guidelines, explicitly protecting volunteer efforts on county roads, passed unanimously. A second motion to accept Robert's resignation and open immediate nominations for all board positions carried the same. By 8:15, the meeting concluded. People didn't bolt for the doors. They lingered in clusters, talking in low, animated voices, shaking hands, exchanging numbers as if new alliances had just been forged. A few approached me quietly. "Thank you, Mark. You kept us from feeling trapped in our own homes." One little girl in pigtails tugged my sleeve and handed me a folded sheet of construction paper. Crayon drawings depicted a big red truck pushing white waves aside, a stick figure driver waving from the cab. Beneath it, in careful block letters, "Thank you for plowing." I folded it carefully and slipped it into my coat pocket. Karen left through the same side door she'd entered alone, papers still clutched tight. No one followed. No one called after her. Outside, the night air carried the faint, wet smell of melting snow. Gutters dripped in steady percussion. Porch lights glowed warmer than they had in weeks. I drove home slowly, windows cracked to let in the sound of water running along curbs, the first tentative song of spring. Elmwood Circle lay empty under the street lamps. The ragged tunnel carved by the midnight crew gaped like a wound, but the Lexus itself was gone, towed away at last, quietly, without witness. Karen's porch light remained off. 3 days later, a brief bulletin appeared on the HOA board and in every inbox. Notice to residents. Karen Delaney has formally stepped down from her position as Vice President of the Willow Creek Ridge HOA, effective immediately. We thank her for her service and will hold a special election next month to fill the vacancy. No further explanation. No ceremony. Just a line in the record already fading. The grip she had tried to tighten around the neighborhood had slipped entirely, not with drama, but with the quiet finality of snow giving way to earth. And for the first time in a long winter, Willow Creek Ridge felt unmistakably, undeniably lighter. The melt came gradually, almost shyly at first. Thin rivulets began tracing pale lines along the curbs, carrying away weeks of accumulated grime. Icicles hanging from gutters stretched, trembled, then surrendered with soft plinks into softening snowbanks. Children reappeared on sidewalks in bright boots, stomping through slush with delighted shrieks that echoed farther than they had in months. Birds tested tentative songs from bare branches, as if confirming the world was still turning beneath the white shroud. Willow Creek Ridge had always been quiet, but now the quiet felt different, lighter, freer, like a held breath finally released. And one morning, without fanfare or announcement, Karen's red Lexus SUV was simply gone. No dramatic exit. No final flourish. I learned later from Mike that she'd arranged a second tow the first crew had given up when their winch couldn't budge the frozen mass. The second team arrived before dawn, worked in grim silence, and hauled the vehicle away sideways through the ragged tunnel like extracting a relic from permafrost. She didn't wave goodbye to anyone. She didn't send another email. She resigned. The notice was brief, posted on the bulletin board, and emailed to all. Notice to residents. Karen Delaney has formally stepped down from her position as Vice President of the Willow Creek Ridge HOA. We thank her for her service and will be holding a special election next month to fill the role. That was all. No elaboration, no defense, just a vacancy where rigid control had once sat. And in the eyes of the neighborhood, it wasn't merely a board seat that had opened, it was the stranglehold itself that had finally loosened. My routine didn't shift overnight. I still rose early, checked the forecast, kept the blade sharp and the tanks full. I still spread salt on lingering slick patches before the sun could trick them into black ice. But now when I worked, I did so without the shadow of impending citations or deliberate obstacles. People waved more openly. Some honked cheerful greetings as I passed. Others left small offerings on my porch cookies. In Ziploc bags, a thermos of chili from the Martinez's, a fresh apple pie from the Kellers with a note tucked beneath, for plowing the path and clearing the air. Then came the plaque, small handmade nailed discreetly to the base of the community bulletin board near the clubhouse. Weathered cedar letters carved with care, in appreciation of those who clear the way, even when no one asks them to. No name, no date. I never learned who made it, but I passed it every time I drove by, and each time it caught the light just right, the words seemed to glow a little warmer. The new board elected swiftly and without drama chose Melinda Green as vice president. She invited me to the next meeting not to speak, just to sit in the back as a guest. She even offered to reimburse fuel and salt costs from the HOA budget. I declined the money, but I attended. The room felt different. Laughter surfaced easily. Someone joked about drafting a no hair dryers in driveways ordinance. Another suggested an official plow appreciation day. The teasing was gentle, the kind that only blooms when shared hardship has passed, and people remember they're on the same side. As I left, Robert Langston caught me at the door. "Streets are awfully quiet these days," he said with a half smile. Yeah, I agreed. They are. He studied me for a moment. "You didn't just clear Snowmark. You cleared something bigger." I didn't reply right away. Just nodded, shook his hand, and stepped into the evening. That night, I walked the neighborhood on foot, something I hadn't done since before the first warning email. Snow crunched softly under my boots, giving way to wet gravel in patches. Warm light spilled from windows, families, around dinner tables, couples curled on couches, kids building sprawling Lego cities on living room rugs. Ordinary scenes, but they felt precious after weeks of isolation behind frosted glass. At Elmwood Circle, I paused. The space where the Lexus had stood was bare now. The last remnants of the Cocoon collapsed into harmless mounds along the curb. A small avalanche of melt had exposed black asphalt beneath gleaming wet under the street lamp. The circle was open, truly open. I stood there a long while, hands in pockets, breathing in the damp, earthy scent of approaching spring. This was what a neighborhood should be, people looking out for one another, not policing one another. I never needed a title to do the right thing. Never wanted one. I just needed my truck, my shovel, and the quiet certainty that standing ground matters. And I had all three. A week later, a knock sounded at my front door. Jared and Rebecca from Cedar Loop stood on the porch, their newborn bundled in a soft blue blanket against the evening chill. They held a small gift box tied with ribbon. "We just wanted to say thank you," Rebecca said softly, "for keeping this place livable when everything felt frozen." I opened the box. Inside lay a miniature metal truck, hand-painted red silver plow blade, welded to the front, my last name, brushed carefully along the door in tiny perfect letters. Jared shrugged, smiling. "Figured you deserved a proper trophy." I turned the little model over in my hands, surprised by the sudden tightness in my throat. "Thank you," I managed, voice low. They left with a wave, and I stood in the doorway long after their footsteps faded, holding the tiny truck like something far heavier than metal. Peace returns quickly after chaos. People forget just as quickly who tried to bury it beneath rules and resentment. But I won't forget, because sometimes the hardest paths to plow aren't through deep drift. They're through fear, through enforced silence, through the doubt that you're alone in doing what's right. You're never alone. And once you break through, the way forward opens wide, clean, and bathed in sunlight, just like it was always meant to be.